Good evening, Poe fans. Welcome back to our interview. Tonight we have a special guest. We have Vincent Heselwood. He actually is known to us because of our poetry contest. He was our first place winner. So congratulations, Vincent. Thank you
Thank
for
you.
entering. We enjoyed your work. But we would like to welcome everybody back, and we'd like to talk more about you. So, without further ado, I'm Jeannie Smith, and this is
Carmen Bolden.
So, please tell us a little bit about yourself, Vincent. We want to know it all.
Okay. I'm Vincent Heselwood. I'm a writer of horror mostly. I make the majority of my income now ghostwriting for other horror writers, and also writing audiobooks for people on YouTube. So essentially, I'll send people short stories, and they'll give it to an actor, and the actor records what I've written. Prior to that, I was a teacher of English and literature. I taught at an international school in Malaysia for a few years. Prior to that, I lived in Zambia for a while, and I worked for a charity there, which I was overseeing an educational project. And prior to that, I taught in England at my old high school, which was kind of weird. Yeah,
That's really cool though. Yeah.
yeah, a bit of a strange experience, but it was fun. That was my first teaching position. And it was strange in the sense that when I went back, there were a lot of the same teachers that taught me, still on the
Mhm.
staff. So people who had previously been my teachers were now my colleagues, which was, like I say, it was a strange experience, but it was fun, and I really enjoyed teaching in that area. But yeah, I've been writing seriously now and being paid for it for probably about 5 years.
Okay.
And like I say, sometimes it's submitting to anthologies, which I mostly did under a pen name up until this year.
Hmm.
And the other aspect is doing the ghostwriting for other people. So
Okay.
I've done maybe 12 or 14 novels
Oh,
for other
wow.
people,
Okay.
plus hundreds of short stories, poetry compilations. So I did a whole poetry collection for another writer, which is a little odd. But at least they kind of take the poetry and put their name on it, and then you see this person in the newspaper and doing all this media about the poetry that they've written, which they didn't write.
Oh,
But
wow.
but it's a kind of it's a strange job. It's a weird way to make a living, but
Yeah.
it's something I enjoy. And then from this year, I've been releasing stuff under my own name. So I
Mhm.
have a novel that's been published in July, from Horrorsmith Publishing, which is the first one that I've put out under my own name. So
Okay.
Congratulations.
Yes.
that's up to today, I think. Yeah. Oh, thank you.
Yes. And I have downloaded your book, but I haven't gotten a chance to read it yet because I'm also a teacher, and Jeannie is a retired teacher, and I teach freshman English right now at the high school
Oh,
level.
okay.
So
Yeah.
we're a lot in common with you, and
Yeah.
but I'm anxious to read it. It sounds really, really good.
Oh, thank you. That's very kind of you.
Yeah, it's wonderful that I guess one of the things is not a lot of people understand that ghostwriting has been going on for many, many years.
Mhm.
Mm.
I know that the Hardy Boys series and the Nancy Drew series, they're published under Franklin W. Dixon and Caroline Keene,
Mhm.
but those are actually ghostwriters. There were ghostwriters who were writing these serials. So, but it is kind of I still can't understand how you can write other people's poetry yet they get the credit for it. I'm still a little confused on that one. How can you ghostwrite poet? I can understand ghostwriting like serial novels and stuff like that, but
Mhm.
poetry, I'm a little confused about. But that's just one of those things, I guess. And you are in a group of writers called Dark Peak Writers. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's me and a few others. One of them, a guy called Nathan Hunt. who is a very good friend of mine. He's a fantastic poet. A lot of the things that he wrote were compared to Poe in the
Oh,
reviews.
nice.
He did a collection called Immortalized in Ink, and
Okay.
essentially a lot of it was things that he'd been writing since he was about 17, 16. And
Oh, that's
he's
incredible.
so what he basically did was went back to his juvenile sort of adolescent poetry that you've obviously probably seen a lot of it as a teacher and marked it. But he took bits of that and then showed the sort of evolution of his writing over time. So you saw the sort of really things that I've got in drawers in notebooks at home that I would never show to anyone. But he's very happy to sort of put it out there and then show how it's progressed and how his poetry's improved and how even themes have developed over time. And yeah, it's
Okay.
really, really good work.
That
But basically, sorry.
Oh no, go ahead, and then I'll say something. Go ahead.
Yeah, so that's basically just three of us that we
Okay.
live in the same small town and we all write now, so it would just seem like a nice way to sort of put a label on it or put an idea on it.
Yeah,
Um,
that's great.
in terms of what you were saying about the ghostwriting, I think it tends to fall into three categories. In that we have some people who see it as a business, like you were saying with the Nancy Drew books and things like that, where nowadays it's very much they see an opportunity in the idea that, well, if I can put a book out and I can put a series of books out and it becomes popular, doesn't really matter whose name is on it, as long as I'm the owner of it and I will make the money off it. So that's
Sure.
one strand of it that I do. The other strand is people who maybe have an idea or they have a sketched outline and they will literally say to me, I don't have the talent or I don't have the time or I have an idea, I have a skeleton, but I just don't think that I'm the person to put the flesh on the bones.
Okay.
So if I give you the basics and a very rough outline, can you do it for me? And like I said, that kind of thing I quite like. I think those people, you're genuinely doing a service for them. And then the final category is the ones that you're saying, where they essentially want the kudos. So I want to be an author, I want to be a poet, and they don't really care what you write as long as they can put their name on it afterwards.
Okay.
Which again, that's the strange one, especially with
Yeah.
the poetry, because I feel like and sometimes
It's
they'll have specifications like, can you make sure that you represent my cultural background and the country I'm from and the experiences I've had? You kind of think, well, no, because I'm not from where you're from. I have nothing in common with you whatsoever.
right.
But when it comes to actually just writing something, a structured piece, yeah, okay, I can do that.
Yeah. Oh, that would be very strange to do that because poetry is so internalized from your soul, and to be able to especially try to write from someone's cultural background, especially where you have not grown up with how they grew up and just their feelings, experiences, and things like that, to put into a poem. That's
Yeah.
wow.
So you're essentially writing a dramatic monologue in
Yeah.
character as the author, even though it's not a dramatic monologue. Yeah,
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah, it's a weird thing to do, but
Yeah.
it's
But
fun. It's
that's
very
impressive
challenging.
though.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's really neat. No, what I was going to say, I took a note on, you said it was Nathan Hunt was the
Yeah.
author that, okay, I wrote
I
down,
think
I typed up a little thing to like look into, because we're always looking for things that people compared to Poe or Poe-esque in nature and things like that. So thank you for sharing that.
he's a very talented writer.
Yeah, that'll be awesome. So also too, what we always ask all of our guests that we have on the podcast, or we call it the podcast, how did you find Poe? Like, what was your like earliest memory of Poe and, ooh, this guy's pretty cool or whatever?
I think I always say to people when I was very young, I was always obsessed with horror, with monsters, with it was
Mhm.
always the thing that was for me. And when I was around 10, the BBC used to run something called Dr. Terror's Vault of Horror, and it was on
Okay.
in the early hours of the morning, and it was a guy in a mask, and he would introduce two horror films, and one
Okay.
would be like a classic black and white one, and one would be a modern horror film. And
Okay.
my parents would record it for me on the Friday night, and I would spend Saturday afternoons watching these kind of Bela Lugosi and Boris Karloff and all that kind of
Nice.
stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And so I heard about Poe through that, I think. I think that's where
Mm-hmm.
I first heard the name and references to it.
Mm-hmm.
And then as I kind of got into my very early teens, if we were going to charity shops and what you call thrift stores, my mum's way of sort of placating me if she was going to drag us around the shops was, well, you can get a book from the thrift store, from the charity shop, because they were
Mm-hmm.
cheap.
Yeah.
Hmm.
And I remember picking up a volume of Poe, and whilst the rest of the shopping was going on, I was just sitting in a corner somewhere in the store reading Poe, and I absolutely fell in love with it.
That's
And
awesome.
I think there from there, originally you sort of read it on the surface level. As you know, as a kid, it's just, it's a gory story, or it's a kind of a creepy story. And
Mm-hmm.
then but I think the thing with that is you keep coming back to those stories as you get older, you can keep revisiting them. And then obviously as I got older and slightly more mature as a writer, as a reader, I started
Mm-hmm.
to recognize how he did what he did. So how he actually puts the stories together and what the
Mm-hmm.
techniques are below it, and that really cemented it for me. And
Okay.
the construction of it and the way that he sort of, and then obviously that progresses into years later. You're then teaching it, and you can sort of share that with other kids who are around the same age that you were when you
Mm-hmm.
first looked at it. It's a nice experience.
Yeah. Oh, that's awesome. And you have been in, I think, have you been in every volume of Love Letters to Poe?
Yes, I was in the first two under a pseudonym, under Eleanor
Okay.
Sciolistein.
Mm-hmm.
And then in the third volume, which is coming out soon,
Yes.
I'll
Yeah, it's
be
exciting.
under my own name for this one. So
Oh,
I've kind of
awesome.
taken the step to actually put something under my own name. So I think this
Okay.
one is like a reworking of, which is, it's funny because that one's going to be a reworking of The Telltale Heart,
Mm-hmm.
and it actually evolved out of an idea that came up in a class I was teaching.
Oh,
Um,
nice. Okay.
because we, as a class with some sort of IB students, we were talking about how the narrators never identified as male or female.
Mm-hmm.
Hmm.
And, and if you start to look at the narrator as a female, the whole thing about the eye suddenly really takes on a more sinister character, because you have that whole thing about the male gaze. And then you start to trace that through the imagery of penetration and the
Mm-hmm.
idea of going inside of the person. And obviously, when the narrator's then talking about how she reverses the power in the story, she's then penetrating the darkness either with the lamp, or she's penetrating the darkness with the head coming into the room, or she's
Mm-hmm.
penetrating the building and it's actually going again. So it's basically a reworking of this theme that I talked through with my students into a
Okay.
narrative now. So it's done in a slightly different way.
Oh,
But it's kind of nice that you've got a story now that evolved out of the discussions with students.
yeah. Oh, absolutely. And we'll be excited to check out your story in that volume. I've read the first two. I think Jeannie, you finished both of them too as well. The
Right.
first two,
Yes.
yeah. And so we're excited to get that third version coming out
Yeah,
soon. I know
yeah,
Sarah sent a email like an update that they were just about, they're getting close.
yeah. She's fantastic, Sarah.
Yeah,
I think
she is. Yeah,
it,
yeah.
it always makes me laugh that there are so many Smiths involved in anything they do. So there's
Yes.
obviously even on this
Hmm.
call, there's Sarah Smith. My publisher for the other book is Smith. So
Yeah.
I don't
And
know what
then
I don't
you
know
have,
what it is with these Smiths, but
I know, and then Jeannie Smith here.
exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
You
We're
Smiths are
everywhere.
everywhere, Jeannie.
Everywhere. Yeah. We're everywhere. But speaking of horror and Telltale Heart, of course, because Poe has always been deemed the man who kind of pushed that genre and created it in some aspect before, before it actually was given a name. He was giving us some uh, tiptoes into that genre. So, what about the horror part has always spoken to you, especially when it comes to Poe? Like with, what's drawn you most to that genre more than anything, I guess is what I'm trying to ask.
Yeah. I mean, I think with Poe in particular, the two things I always, again, used to talk to the students about, or that really got me, was he makes the horror much more immediate. So prior to Poe, it would always be when you had a Gothic novel, it was happening over there. It happened somewhere far, far away in some rugged mountains, in some distant land, and that was pretty much what defined being the Gothic setting. And suddenly with Poe, the scary thing is here. It's like it's in your home. It's it's your pet. It's happening literally within the body of the household. In Telltale Heart. So making it more immediate and more imminent, I think, was his big step, or one of the big contributions. And then the other thing that I always loved was what they call the fantastic. So I used to teach a guy called Todorov, and the idea that you have, if you think of it like a seesaw, that you have the uncanny on one side and the marvelous on the other, meaning that it's something that happens. Maybe you can explain it. Maybe it's it's not quite supernatural, or it's completely supernatural. And the fantastic comes right in the middle as the point where the reader is never quite sure. Okay, is it a supernatural occurrence, or is it just something that's a little bit weird and odd? And I think that little point in the middle is a really good one to exploit. As if you can do that in your writing and do it well, then that's very, very effective. Because I mean, it's again, it's the thing that makes horror creepy when you're talking to people. It's always more terrifying when you're talking to a friend and your friend tells you about an experience, and then you're hearing them say it, and again, there's that little bit of doubt that you're thinking, well, no, surely that's not, it's not supernatural, but the fact that you even doubt it slightly, that's what makes it more terrifying.
Yeah, that's true. It's like, it's plausible that it could happen.
Yeah, that's where it goes. Yeah,
absolutely.
And Poe loved to touch upon the psychological horror, like you were talking about with the Telltale Heart, and the female being the narrator rather than a male, and having a different psychological spin on having to put up with that, or how it would affect you and that kind of thing. And it's always been, to me, Poe is personal. Poe always likes to bring personal into his writing, to where whether you're the reader or you putting yourself in the narrator's position or you're identifying with another character, there's something in there that is speaking to you. And
I think that, and I think that's, again, like I was saying about the technique and the way that he writes, and the things that so even I always thought Poe writes like a poet. So he writes prose like a poet. So you get the employment of all these techniques and all these devices that you would get in poetry in the prose. So if you think of something like the Telltale Heart, even in the first few lines where you get that sort of alliteration of the H sound, that you can hear or feel the breath of the person speaking to you, the narrator. So immediately, like you're saying, you as a reader are involved, because you're in proximity to the person telling the story. And that's kind of creepy, because now you're there with this person as they're revealing this, you know what I mean? And considering he was doing that at the time he was doing it, it's stunning.
It truly speaks to his genius, in my opinion, that he could pull that off and be such an involved writer and reader as he's writing. because you
Yeah.
have to read and read from a point of view as you're writing in order so you can understand it, in my opinion. So I guess one of the things also I'd like to ask Vincent is, how did you go from teaching into writing? I mean, what was the turning point that kind of pushed you to where you left the profession of teaching and started just, going after writing? Was there a turning point for you, or did something happen? So it's just kind of interesting to see what spurred you to reach for that.
Yeah. I think basically, I think it was me, myself, and my wife that we were in Malaysia, and I loved teaching. I always have. I loved the actual part of being in the classroom with the kids, and particularly coming up with ways of explaining more difficult things in easier ways. That part of it, always loved. The job I had in Malaysia was, again, fantastic. I had some great people around me. But it was very, very demanding for what to do it properly. I felt like to do it properly, kind of, where you got paid really well. It was a real contrast to what I'd done in Zambia previously. So in Zambia, there was no pay, there were no resources in the classrooms. You were literally teaching in mud huts sometimes, where the kids are just sitting on the floor. You've got 60 kids in something that was sort of the size of most people's living room. And then when I went to Malaysia, every child had a laptop, and it was just a very jarring contrast. But the package that I got for teaching was great in that you had sort of housing, and we had a swimming pool, and it was, you were getting all that stuff. But then all I used to do was walk past the swimming pool. I never had time to actually go near it or actually be in it because I was doing too much of the work to make sure that things were the way I wanted them to be in the classroom. And like I say, I think I'd always loved the writing side of things, and I was doing it more and more. And it got to the point where I was doing that on the side if I could. And like you say, myself, my wife, we traveled around. We've done a few years in Malaysia, and we said, okay, well, I think it might be time now to kind of take a break for a little while. And she writes a travel blog.
Nice.
And does very well with it. And I thought, well, okay, while she's doing that, I'll try my hand at the writing. And so far, we've managed to make it pay on the road. So, while we're traveling and while we're moving around, we've managed to kind of pay the rent and keep a roof over our head.
That's
So
great.
It's a nice way of doing it for now.
Yeah.
kind of, it's an adventure, and we can keep going. And yeah. So I think more than anything, it was something that I'd always wanted to do and always wanted to try, but you didn't have the time to do it. So the pair of us thought, well, okay, if we're really serious about this and it's something that we want to do, then why don't we both take some time off and give it a go and see whether we can actually make a living doing it, or if we can sort of pursue it. So that's how we ended up doing that.
Oh, wonderful. I mean,
It
it
is.
sounds like a great thing, and definitely, as coming from a retired teacher and a current teacher, we understand the pylon of everything of doing in the classroom, and it doesn't leave much time to do anything else, whether you have been writing, like I know Carmen and I both have been writers from early ages on, and most writers do start early in their years, like artists do. So it's really very rare for teachers to have the time to actually pursue something like that. So kudos to you and your wife that you're being able to live that and enjoy that time and enjoy being able to express yourself, and her being a travel. Is she a vlogger or a blogger? Does she do a video or does she do a blog?
That blog. So it's mostly writing with a photography. But yeah, she's very, very conscientious in the detail. So she's very, very, very much focused on making sure that what she does is useful. So she will give advice on particular places or places to be visited or things like that. but she, yeah, really takes the time to make sure that, number one, it's engaging, that what you're reading is just dry and boring the way that you might be able to get it off ChatGPT if you put it into AI, that you actually, but also that you get things that are more personal. So you get personal experiences or personal recommendations and things that maybe we've actually done or actually tried out, rather than just, okay, let's type into Google and find out what the top rated place is, so that people can get a bit more of an insight into a place.
Wonderful.
Yeah,
That's
that is. And I know, like, my husband and I have not traveled outside of North America. And so those types of blogs and things are so helpful to when you're going a new place, to make sure you're not like trying to be an efficient tourist, I guess would be the best way to say it.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Well, Vincent, tell us about The Taste of Tiny Bones, your novel that just came out, and not without spoilers.
Okay, without spoilers. So essentially, it kind of goes back to what I was saying earlier about watching horror as a kid. Because obviously when I tell people that, some people are horrified by the idea of it, and they say, well, you know, at that age, what are you doing watching these kind of horror films? But the way it was always explained to me was, it's a guy in a mask. You know, it's all pretend. It's a guy in a mask. It's just special effects, and it took a lot of the sting out of actually being scared by it. And The Taste of Tiny Bones deals with the opposite to that, because it centers around the folklore behind the bogeyman as a character. Because there's a big difference, is that the bogeyman is the character that your parents said was real. So, you know, there's no, when they say to you, you know, don't go in that room because the bogeyman will get you, or, you know, be nice to your sister because if you don't, the bogeyman will get you. It's like, they're not talking about a guy in a mask. And as a kid, you recognize that. You see, like, they're talking about something real. So that's different to these monsters that they said weren't real. So that's the first thing I wanted to explore. Second to that, I had a job at one point where I was writing for a creepypasta website, but rather than writing the actual short creepypasta narratives, my job was to look into the folklore background and the history of those characters. So looking at, when was the first time that this character turned up on the internet? When was the first time that a particular aspect was added? What are the influences on that character from the past? And that kind of sparked the idea for me that, well, if you did trace that, you're basically watching folklore in real time. Because the way that the creepypasta works is that nobody has any copyright on it. That it's almost like a joke, in that if you tell a joke, somebody else will tell it 3 days later. It's the same basic joke, but it's got new flourishes to it, or different details, or certain things might be changed, which is how folkloric stories would have changed, would have adapted, and how they would have developed over time. And you can look at a creepypasta story and you can trace all the little additions. You can literally watch it growing in real time. So in The Taste of Tiny Bones, you have a character who basically does that for the bogeyman, because she's intrigued by the idea that if you want to look at vampires, you can trace the history of how that idea evolves. If you want to look at the werewolf, you can look at how that story evolves. But because the bogeyman was always passed orally, he exists everywhere, but you can't pin him down. You can't find him. He's everywhere, but nowhere at the same time. And then to put that into those ideas into a narrative, you get the idea of a child basically being attacked, and this novel starts with a child having that same experience that most of us have had, where you're under the blanket and you don't want to put anything out. You know, it's somehow you innately know that just a blanket is a protection. That if you put your hand out of the blanket, then it's going to get you.
Yes.
So what I wanted to explore then was, well, what happens if that incident actually happened and you could catch it on camera?
Okay.
So what if the closet did open and something did slide out, but you had CCTV or you had a baby monitor, and the police could look back at that and see what came out and catch glimpses of it. And yeah, and if you want to know how all that fits together, you have to buy the book.
Yes.
So that's, yeah, but those are the main sort of themes and ideas, without giving any spoilers away, of how it all fits together.
Yeah,
It
I
sounds
can't wait
very
to read it.
interesting.
Yeah.
Yes. It definitely sounds like one of those forensic, CSI type of things, like, oh, is it really there? What kind of evidence you're going to have? I need to know the the paranormal things that you see on the internet, like the ghost hunters and all that kind of stuff. It's like, is it real? Is it not? So, and like you said, boogeyman has always been traditionally passed down orally.
Mhm.
So there's not really any kind of written, and that goes back to the early years of how, way back in history, that oral tradition was the only way, because that was before writing, with the Sumerians and the clay tablets and all that. So
Mhm.
that sounds just very intriguing
Yes.
to me. And
Hope
I
so.
can't wait. I'm like with Carmen. Once Carmen finishes it, I might borrow hers, or I might download my own. You never know. I usually just borrow her books because I
Yeah,
get complaints.
we'll share books a lot of times.
Yeah. Well, I
I can't
get
condone that
complaints from a
practice.
lot of my friends because I have so many books.
She
I
does.
have like 18 tubs of 18-gallon tubs full of books. And that doesn't count what I have on my Kindle and all that kind of stuff. So it's like,
Are you,
sometimes,
are you guilty of buying different editions of the same book?
yes.
Yeah. Yeah.
I get hardback, I get
I know a
paperback.
lot of people that do that. Yeah.
Oh,
I get
yes.
third
Several
editions.
copies.
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
It's like, what did they add to it to make it even better than it already was? It's like, yeah.
Yeah. I think that's,
Or they'll
I think
just
that's,
change the cover art. I mean, even if they just change the cover art, I
Yes.
have to have the new.
Yes.
I have to have the new one. I can't help it.
Mhm.
So,
that
but
sounds very familiar.
yeah, it's a sickness. I sometimes think, I'm like, okay.
Oh, I
So,
know
but
it. I know it.
Vincent, we would love for you to read your poem that you wrote for
Yes.
us. And I'm going to say for us because it was published, it was sent to us. So therefore,
Yes. For the Poet Like Poe contest.
yes, for 2024.
Yes.
Okay. Sharon's Cairn. And so, as snow like scattered ash, and splintered shards like shattered glass, from ancient mirrors long since smashed in silent flakes did fall, as mothers, still unreassured by charm and hex hung over the doors, their husbands and their sons implored, to bar and lock them all. In huddled hush to hearth they brought infants that they might be taught of everything that children ought be told of Sharon's Cairn. And so they spoke while shadows climbed, with ink-black fingers all entwined as thin tenebrous creeping vines across the walls like worms, hissed and lisped in whispered tones about that pile of rough-hewn stones beneath which lay the Strix's bones, and no mere man could burn. How in the place where she was hanged, a tiny island scratch of land, the mound of sacred rock still stands, that they call Sharon's Cairn. And so they told the tales of she, who stalked the space between the trees, on horse-like limbs with back-bent knees, to hunt the sons of men, and how she'd be seen upon the heath, a tiny arm between her teeth, and who knew who she there would meet, or what give unto them. That is what was caged below, pinned by a river's constant flow, underneath that tower of stones, still known as Sharon's Cairn. And so they showed each tender place upon the naked flesh and face, where she would lacerate and trace her symbols, stars, and signs, said how round her wretched place, affixed in arabesque bouquets, where puppet dolls of straw displayed, all strangled up with twine, whilst dangling from the naked trees, above the amber carmine leaves, a dozen tongues could there be seen, as clear as Sharon's Cairn. And so the bold and brave were sent, with steel and flame and sacrament, 15 terrified young men to drag the witch to trial. They tied and bound the old one good, and rowed her out across the floods of running water, midst which stood that lone accursed isle. and she was hung, her carcass pitched onto a pyre, and what persisted after that lies in the pit, still under Shaigran's cairn. And so, like gold were 7 weeks, sweetened days of nepenthe, for from those taloned hands they'd freed the glad and grateful town, until one still Stygian night, when from the depths untouched by light, something stirred, unfurled and cried, in dreadful, vengeful howls. Of course they knew from whence it came, that call of unrelenting pain. Still they said, she's held in place, and sleeps at Shaigran's cairn. And so we know, a witch cannot overrunning waters cross, its flow shall hold till all is lost, the wicked soul in place. Thus the Strix was there inhumed, upon an island so subsumed on every side by waters blue, and there she shall remain, till men no longer walk upon the earth above the fallen one, and every stone has worn and gone away from Shaigran's cairn. But lo, the snow has cloaked this night, with cold that holds and turns of tides, and freezes water into ice, so none shall flow nor run. And when that water does not flow, and stands as hard as hearts of stone, she who does not rest below is free to roam and hunt. And so they hold the thoughts of she who walks with children twixt her teeth, for on this night she does not sleep, but feasts at Shaigran's cairn.
Nice.
Yes,
Wonderful.
because that's,
Wonderful.
oh, it's so
Thank you.
beautiful. So beautiful. So what was the inspiration for the poem?
I think it's that idea of stories being passed orally,
Mm-hmm.
and the idea that sometimes it's creepier when the story is recited to you rather
Yes.
than being written down, and trying to catch some of that magic that comes with the oration and
Mm-hmm.
put that into words or put that onto paper. Um, the Shaigran's Cairn story, I think I actually wrote a long time ago as a short story. But it just seemed to really, it kind of worked as a short story, but I thought it would be better in poetry because of that recitation, the
Mm-hmm.
reciting and repetition, and you
Absolutely.
can't really should write a short story and have that kind of refrain coming back over and over again. So if you think of something more like The Raven, where you've got that kind of repetition over and
Mm-hmm.
over, it's almost like an incantation.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
so I think that's where the inspiration for that came.
It is beautiful. And we were so excited, that you won, because like when we read all of them, we did not have any part in the judging. And it's like, oh, this is so wonderful.
Yeah, that's one of the
great
things
timing.
we like to keep ourselves out of the judging, because that's
Yes.
why we keep them anonymous when we send it to the judges, because we don't want to have any kind of influence over anyone's decisions.
Mm-hmm.
But I like what you said, Vincent, because that's one of the things I was going to say, is that hearing someone else read it versus reading it yourself
Yeah.
brings something a little more to it. Because as you were reading it, I was picturing it so well in my mind.
Me too.
And I was seeing different things, because I also taught history, not just, well, I taught all 4 subjects, but
Yeah.
history and English are my main things. But as you was reading, I was picturing the Salem witch trials in my head,
Yes.
about all of that. And then when you were talking about a specific witch, the Madame Lebeau from New Orleans, the voodoo witch of New Orleans, and you were talking about the voodoo dolls, basically the stuffed straws and all that. And I was like just picturing it in my head, and I could feel, and that cadence of you reading it, it brought it a little bit more to life, in my opinion. Just like you talk about with when you're talking about oral stories being heard from a person, they put the inflection, they put their own spin on it, and it causes a little bit more to the story rather than what's on the paper.
Yeah.
So it was wonderful. Well, I enjoyed it very much. So
I did too. And I enjoyed reading it just to myself. But like as Jeannie said, you personally reading it aloud I think it means more to hear it from the poet, because I'm just going to basically mimic what Jeannie just said. It's like, exactly what you meant when you're reading it versus somebody that's cold reading, to know where everything should be enhanced or embellished, really just emphasized and things like that.
So do you
yeah, it's
have any
beautiful.
plans, Vincent, do you have any plans of a next book in the works, or poetry coming out, or anything like that in the near future that we can look forward to?
I have one project I'm working on at the moment, which I'm not entirely sure what it's going to be yet, to be honest.
Oh,
I think it's quite gothic, but probably a little less horror based.
okay.
And so I guess you'll probably find out the same time as me what it's going to be.
Well, we will wait with bated breath along with you.
Yes. Yeah. And are you also working on like any of the ghostwriting that you do as well?
Yes, yeah, still
Okay.
working on those. Yeah.
Okay.
Like you say, I have a few people that I write for consistently.
Mm-hmm.
So I know there's one channel on YouTube that it's literally just my stories. So
Okay.
there's like maybe 60 stories of half an hour there where they're just read by an actor.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't think I think he publishes them under a different name, but I don't think he'd
Okay.
mind me sharing that. So I can give you a link to that if anybody's interested in reading
Oh,
those.
yeah, that would be great. Is it possible you could link it in the chat and then we could share that out?
Yeah, yeah,
Okay.
absolutely. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, because I'm sure our listeners and viewers would love to see that, and check out your writing through the channel. So
And if you want, you can even share your wife's blog.
yes,
So we'll share that out
absolutely.
too. So because
Absolutely.
we love to travel. I know I can't do it as much as, well, I can't travel the way I used to, but anyway. And I have to ask, and I know you said that you're in Istanbul currently, and I love watching the videos in Istanbul because of the cats. Is it true that they do have the cat population?
I live about 2 minutes away from a park called Matcha Park. And in Matcha Park, there are maybe 150 or more in one
Wow.
little area. So people
Okay.
will go down, you come down to the park and they're everywhere, literally everywhere. And people essentially go there on their lunch breaks and they'll just sit in the park for half an hour and play with the cat. And they'll be, like you say, you have the cats, you have the kittens, they feed the cats everywhere. I mean, I joke with my wife that there's one cat that lives around the corner from us, and I walked past where she usually stays, and on the floor is like a chicken kebab, and there's actual cat food, and there's potatoes and things. And I'm looking at it thinking, that's literally what I was about to go to the place next door and buy. Like, the cat eats better than me. Like, I have to pay for that. The cat is having it for nothing. That's
Yeah.
but yeah, you'll go into supermarkets here, and if you take a box of cereal off the shelf, there's a cat behind it, or
Oh, wow.
the cat will be the attendant in the train station, or they'll sort of there are dogs that ride the train or ride the zoo, ride the metro.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's a very kind of animal loving culture, and
Okay.
it's quite nice to see people just walking along the street and take a few seconds to sort of play with the cat and then carry
Yeah.
on and continue with their day. Yeah.
Yeah. Well,
So yeah. So in short, yes, it is absolutely true.
yeah, because I'm just thinking, yeah, like you said, people are going to the park on their lunch break and things. It's like if you're having a bad morning and you go and, pet a cat or two or whatever while you're eating lunch, to me, it's just going to make your day better,
Yeah. I mean, there's in the same part, there's a guy who plays the flute, and it's quite the image when you come down and you see maybe sort of 40 or 50 cats around him, and he's standing in the middle with his flute. It's like the Pied Piper, and it's just like,
Oh my goodness.
it does look like he summoned them. There's something a
That's
little creepy.
awesome.
Yeah.
There's got to be some kind of story in that.
Yeah.
I mean, think about it. Poe wrote with a cat on his shoulder or cat there
Yes.
with him, and he had a bird and all that. So animals, I was just thinking that would be wonderful, especially for people who are artistic. And you were saying that the flute player has his own audience who he doesn't care if they're human. Apparently he has his own audience of cats. So, but I was just wanting some confirmation that all those cool videos that I was watching weren't fake. So
No, 100%. If I walk from here to the supermarket, if I don't see a cat, I'd be very surprised. There's going to be at least 5 or 6 before I come back.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Wow. That's
And
incredible.
there's a reason for me to visit Istanbul if you know in
yes.
the future.
Yes. Well, Vincent, one other question we always like to ask is, what is your favorite Poe story and or poem? Because some people have both.
I think favorite story, probably The Black Cat.
Okay.
I always had a soft spot for the facts in the case of M. Valdemar.
Oh,
That
yes.
was
That's a good one
when I was
too.
younger. But I still think The Black Cat is just
Yeah.
Yes. Oh,
It's so
it's a
good.
good story. Yeah. And you know,
Absolutely.
revenge is always best served. Okay.
All right, Montresor.
I'm just saying, I'm sorry. Okay. But yes, thank you, Vincent, for joining us. Thank you for entering our poetry contest and sharing your talent with us. And thank you for joining us on our interview of Poe Discussions. We appreciate it very much.
Yeah, this has been awesome. So, Jeanie, I guess we are
Poe
out.